right, can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, okay, well, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I love that. Thank you guys for being so responsive right away. My name is Sylvia Snowden. I serve on the board of directors of the National Association of Black Journalists Chicago chapter. I am also the host of KNTV's Political Forum, and I am so happy that you're going to be here this evening. Thank you all for being here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Now, I know that you're looking forward to a very robust discussion on reinventing public safety. Before we do that, though, there are some very important people who want to come up and introduce themselves and share a few words about their organizations and what they're doing in our communities. Is that okay?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so the very first thing we're going to do is hear from our sponsors for the evening. This event is sponsored by the Voices of West Englewood and Neighbors Who Vote. At this time, if I could please have Charise WIlliams come to the front and talk about Voices of West Englewood, I'd really appreciate it. Everybody, can you please receive Charise?
Hello everyone, I'm honored to be here again to talk about public safety in our community, although we are facing a lot of violence in our neighborhoods. So this is an opportunity that we can hear from our candidates who can talk a little bit more in details on how they can address these issues. Voices of West Englewood, I'm the founder. I am an organization that brings various different things to the community so they can be aware of what's going on in the neighborhood. Next, we're going to bring in Neighbors Who Vote.
Yes. Oh.
Judy?
Samantha and Laurel.
Okay, Samantha and Laura will come up and speak.
Thank you, Dory. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So my name is Morrow Cleveland,
And I'm Samantha Dewberry.
and we are with Neighbors Who Vote. So Julia and I started Neighbors Who Vote in 2020 as preparation for the 2020 presidential election. We were just two neighbors who met on Nextdoor.com who wanted to do something in order to help make an impact and encourage voter engagement and voter awareness. And from that, a few years ago, we are here today with, even more people, including Samantha, who have joined our cause. We've joined up with a number of other wonderful organizations in order, again, to help encourage voter engagement, be aware of the issues, aware of the candidates, and we want to all be neighbors who vote. So, just that simple.
Thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to those ladies for sharing that information with us. Now, before we get going, there's one more person I really want to have speak with you this evening. As you know, we are being hosted in the beautiful and historic First Presbyterian Church. And before we begin, I'd love to invite the pastor to come up and share a few words about this very historic church and its place in Chicago. So, Pastor David Black, at this time, we could have you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening and welcome. On behalf of the First Presbyterian Church of Chicago, and especially those members who are gathered here tonight, welcome to our church and our spiritual home. We are so grateful that we can host you, our neighbors, and you, our candidates for service of this community. So thank you for being here tonight. You are in the First Presbyterian Church of Chicago, and I've been asked to give you a little bit of context about why this particular forum is being hosted in this particular church. It happens to not be an accident. So this church next week is going to celebrate its 189th anniversary, which makes it the oldest continuously operating institution in Chicago. It was founded before the city of Chicago. And it was founded in Fort Dearborn as an abolitionist church. And I just want you to take a moment to think about the fact that the oldest continuously operating institution in the city of Chicago is an abolitionist institution. An institution that has been deeply engaged in reimagining public safety and public justice from age to age as the city has gone through its many lives that it's had so far. This is the church's 7th building, and it moved to Woodlawn in 1927. And in the 1970s, this church had an amazing chapter in its history when the elders of the church opened the church to be a haven for the local gang called the Blackstone Rangers, which many people know as the Black Keystone Nation and later the Alrookans. And they occupied the church's 3rd floor in exchange for leaving their firearms in the church safe, which is still here. Nobody's been able to open it in a few years, but as far as I know, all the guns are cleared out. And it was a fascinating program for a lot of reasons. It was completely grassroots. It was an initiative, not just of this church, but also of Apostolic Church of God and a coalition called the Woodlawn Organization, which was very robust at the time and continues to operate in this community. And during that time, many things happened here. You'll notice in the stained glass, there are holes in the stained glass, and many of those are bullet holes from a weekend when there was retaliation from a rival gang. And our neighbors, the Catholic Church, right across the alley, had a Molotov cocktail thrown into their window, which burned their church down in 1978. And it was intended for this church. So the reason that we are here tonight is because somebody got a wrong address. And so this church was sort of at the front lines of reimagining public safety at that time. And part of the reason I bring up that story is because the lawmakers and the law enforcers of the time were not on board with the way that the community was reimagining public safety. This church was raided by police several times, and when the federal government got wind of what was happening and that there was a program to actually employ these young men and women, there was a congressional investigation, and the whole thing was shut down, and the pastor was dragged through the mud. And so I'm especially interested, in light of that history and in light of the sanctuary that we are in right now, in what the future leader servants of our city and our community have to say about what the people are saying is needed in terms of public safety. Not just what lobbyists think is needed, not just what special interests think is right for this community, but what the people gathered in this room and the neighbors gathered in this room imagine for the future of the South Side of Chicago. In the spirit of neighborliness, I just want to invite everybody to turn to somebody close to you and just tell them, I'm glad you're here. Friend or foe, I'm glad you're here. Amen. Amen. And one note of housekeeping, if you need the bathroom this evening, you're going to want to go through this door here and just follow the signs. It's a little bit of a labyrinth, but you'll find your way by the grace of God. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for allowing us to host, and please enjoy.
All right, thank you very much for that past flag. So we are not going to belabor this anymore. We are going to get started. What I'm going to do this time is actually direct your attention right over here to the table of moderators. We are going to get started with our discussion. So the very first thing I'm going to do is introduce everybody this evening so you'll know who we have speaking on the panel this evening, as well as who we have asking questions. After that, I will explain the rules of engagement a little bit more, and then we'll get right into the discussion, okay? Right, firstly, our panelists this evening, I will go from right to left, starting with my right. We're thrilled to have with us Mr. Jonathan Swain. Hello, Jonathan, please raise your hand for people who may not know who you are in the audience. We're also joined by Karin Norington-Reaves. We're also joined by Charise WIlliams. We're also joined by Senator Jacqueline. We're also joined by Kirby Birgans. Kirby, please stand and raise your hand for the speaker. And we're also joined by Mr. Jonathan Jackson. All right, I'm now going to introduce our moderators. Firstly, Jacoby Cochran, who is host of City Cast Chicago. Jacoby, can I ask you to raise your hand so that people know who you are? So Jacoby Cochran is the host of the City Cast Chicago, a daily news podcast and newsletter about all things Chicago. Recent episodes feature Alderwoman Jeanette Taylor, CPS CEO Pedro Martinez, and author Natalie Moore. Jacoby is also a communications lecturer at City Colleges of Chicago and DePaul University. He has facilitated storytelling workshops with various partners, including Google Chicago, Literacy Chicago, and Cook County Jail. Again, Jacoby Cochran. Thank you again for being with us, Jacoby. We're also at this time going to introduce our second moderator for the evening, Grace Chan McKibben. Grace, please wave so that people know who you are. Grace Chan McKibben is the Executive Director of the Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community, a policy advocacy and community planning organization based in Chinatown. This organization has been working with government offices, police, social service organizations, and community activists to facilitate coordinated and holistic approaches to addressing rising anti-Asian hate, as well as concerns about community safety on the near South Side. Again, Grace, thank you for your time this evening. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the rules of engagement. We are going to have an opportunity for our moderators to raise questions to our panelists. We will set our timer for 3 minutes, and when asked the question, the panelists will have an opportunity to offer his or her response. The moderator will have an opportunity to engage with you and have an exchange with you. That exchange is going to last for 3 minutes. You will receive a 30-second warning. We have 30 seconds left, and then at the conclusion of the 3 minutes, I will politely jump in and just remind you that you're out of time. And any questions before we get going? We're all set? Okay, so what I'm going to do at this time is request a microphone for the candidates. Oh, we haven't looked at that. We have a microphone. Okay, so at this time, barring no further objections, we will go ahead and get started. Our first question will be asked by Jacoby Cochran. Jacoby.
Can we pass the mic down? We're going to go in alphabetical order, so we're going to start off with Kirby Birgans. Tonight, you're going to hear questions that focus on things like housing, police alternatives, immigration, domestic violence, LGBTQ plus rights and protections, and potentially federal procurement. My first question again is to Kirby Birgans. Governor Pritzker has set aside money in the 2023 budget to increase the number of state troopers. Mayor Lightfoot here in Chicago has supported the growth of the police academy and to hire more police officers. So I wanted to ask you directly, as a future partner, potential partner to those individuals, do you believe more police means less violence, and why or why not?
Thank you for that question. Unfortunately, no, I don't believe that more police is less violence. I believe that more resources being allocated to those communities that are struggling or blighted with gun violence is the answer. As we see, our politicians have used militarizing our streets and private prisons as a result to end gun violence, but we the people know that it is through street outreach, coaching and counseling, workforce development, advocacy and prevention, and policy changes that is going to end gun violence. I also believe that we need to invest more into our education system. That's the reason why, if I'm elected, I want to join the Education and Labor Committee, because I believe that when inmates get out of prison, they need a job somewhere to go to. So what I want to do is partner with the labor unions to help make sure that those inmates have jobs as well. I want to also make sure that our after-school programs are funded. I went to 13 schools in this district, and to witness their after-school programs was a shame. They was just given basketballs and basically going into a gym to play. But we know that in 2025, majority of the jobs that would be given to individuals would be tech jobs. So I want to invest in those programs that is going to teach kids how to decode, how to make sure that those, how to decode, how to build programs, how to build software development. Those are the things that need to be implemented, not more security.
Great idea, bro. I'm going to ask you to pass the mic to Senator Collins. And Collins, I'm going to ask you the same question. With more money being put aside for state troopers at the state level, city police across your potential district, do you believe more police means less violence?
Of course, I do not believe more police reduce violence. And that's why I think the investment that you make with the police should be also the investment you make in programs. We cannot repeat the past policies that felt that we needed to incarcerate our way out of the issues confronting the community. In the community, everybody is raising the issue about crime. However, it's been the failed policies of the past where you lock them up and throw away the key that have caused, it's only the effects. We're not looking at the root causes. And so approaching it from that way is not going to be very productive. That's why I was proud to be a chief co-sponsor of Reimagining Policing, reimagining the police reform in reference to how do we actually get at the root cause of the violence, right? So we need to ensure that the police, with the responsibility they've had, they have been abusing many of the privileges they have and the powers they have. There's a lot of distrust in the community. What we need to do is not enhance their power. We need to hold them accountable. So in Congress, I would fight for to repeal qualified immunity to hold them accountable. But money is not going to be the answer giving it to the police force. We need more preventative strategies that actually work. And we have statistics that show that preventative strategies work. We need to have re-entry programs to ensure that those individuals returning to the community don't resort back to criminal activity. We need assistance for victims of crime as well to bring them into the equation, and also youth programs that give the kids an opportunity to know that they have opportunities and a horizon out there where they can be gainfully employed. Of course, also increasing quality education across the board. But those are the entities that we need to address and put the money in to make sure that the money does not go to where you don't get the value for your money. There's no benefit analysis done. We have all the overtime for the police department, but there's no guarantee of outcome statistics that show that it actually works. So the state trooper money is basically the governor felt it was necessary, but no money increase.
Thank you.
The next two questions are for Mr. Jonathan Jackson and Ms. Karin Norington-Reaves. So following this logic, where a lot of advocates have been saying that we should increase investment in programs other than police, mental health services, education, engagement with the community, youth engagement, and so on. Do you believe that there's a right percentage of the budget that should be dedicated to policing? And what is the budget and how would you use it? Mr. Jackson.
Thank you very much. That's a city level issue, and to keep it at the congressional level, roughly $1.8 billion that's being spent in the city of Chicago for 13,000 officers. I think you have to police whatever is necessary, and that would be at the mayor and the alderman. That's their discretion. I would support that. So let us deal with the two primary functions of policing. One is in protective work and the other is in detective work. When you have 86% of the murders unsolved, the federal government should come in and have some oversight of what's happening in our policing department. If 86% of the murders are going unsolved, that is unsafe. That's an issue for the federal government. When the guns are coming in from across the state borders, that's bigger than the Chicago Police Department. We have to help the Chicago Police Department stop the flow of guns from Indiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. What we can see about federal intervention, I can envision a task force of first responders that can deal with the mental issues. Policing is now being defined and stretched too thin. They're being called from everything from domestic violence to children's truancy to persons that are missing from home. They need some assistance, and not only do they need training, some officers, we should also have additional screening. A person like Jason Van Dyke should have never been on the force to shoot up a child 16 times. So some of them need a psychological evaluation and should be offered the force.
Do I have time for a follow-up? Yeah. So do you have a percentage in mind? What percentage?
No percentage in mind. I think that's what's happened in the city of Chicago. We have the most officers per capita of any city in the United States of a major city. And yet, in 2020, we spent over $100 million in police overrun. I'd like to see that money redirected to coaches, just the overtime money, to coaches and music teachers and mental therapists. Just carve that overrun money out and redeploy that.
Thank you, Mrs. Jacqueline. So, Ms. Norington-Reaves, let's pass the mic to Ms. Norington-Reaves. The same question.
The question.
Yeah, there's the same question. There are many advocates that would like to see more money devoted to alternatives to policing, including mental health, education, youth engagement, and so on. Do you believe that, what percentage do you think of the budget should be devoted to policing, and what should it include?
So to be clear, as Jonathan said, the city budgetary issue is really something within the province of the city of Chicago and the city council for them to make the decision with respect to the budget. What I want to see is better and more strategic use of the funding that is actually already available and using it at scale to provide greater services and resources for our communities, from workforce development, career exploration, career exposure, paid internships, apprenticeships, pre-apprenticeship programs. We have a plethora of programs that are available. We are not integrating those initiatives in order to actually see impact. With respect to the police, the rampant amount of overtime is, I think, obscene. Now, I'm not a police officer, so I can't speak from personal experience in terms of what they experience. But nationally, we have had an actual deficit of police officers in every major urban city across the nation. But the part of the reason that they are understaffed is because they're spending so much of their funds on overtime. We saw just over the weekend where they've taken away everybody's vacations, so you've got officers working 12 and 13 and 14 and 16 hours. And when you're paying them at the overtime pay with the contracts that have been negotiated with the FOP, the rate is exorbitant. And so that money gets expended in a way that actually does not necessarily keep us more safe. The other piece for me is look at the amount of money that is expended every year on settlements for police misconduct. Wouldn't it be better to invest in qualified training and ensure that we have the companion services such as mental health supports, so that we're focusing on trauma, that we're really decreasing the likelihood of trauma arising from an interaction with a police officer as opposed to just funding more and more police presence and activity. So I think there's a better way to deploy the dollars that we have, but to your question, Grace, I can't tell you a specific percentage. I just know that we can be better and more strategic with the funds that we actually do have and deploy them in a way that not only keeps us safe, but ensures that our communities are able to thrive as well. Thank you.
My next question, my next question is to Jonathan Swain and Charise WIlliams. Let's start with you, Jonathan. We hear a lot about alternatives to policing, and people start throwing out a lot of catch terms like after-school programs, youth programs, reducing the flow of illegal guns. Do you have two specific ideas for community safety that don't involve gun control or police reform?
To ensure that I have the question, so you're asking two specific ideas that create greater safety in our community that have nothing to do with gun control or police reform. Okay. Well, I think there are, and I didn't stand up early, so I'm Jonathan Swain for those that I did not see. I think there are two things that we need to focus on. And I look at this through the lens of the businessman, and I look at it from a numeric perspective. I believe in after-school activity and opportunity for youth because I think there's a numeric benefit to that. If a young person has 5 opportunities in life, and 2 of those opportunities are criminal, there's a 40% chance that that child will engage in something criminal. If you take that same child and give them 100 opportunities, and say increase the number of opportunities for criminality to 5, your overall percentage goes down. So by merely increasing,
Yeah, actually, where you're getting those numbers, because
I mean, these are hypothetical numbers that are throwing out just based on random probabilities. Okay? It's because the question becomes with any young person in terms of criminal activity. Criminal activity is a choice. And the question is, how do you reduce the probability of anyone engaging in that particular activity? And so what I'm suggesting is expanding the young people's opportunities, be it through investing in parks, because our parks are unused and they're unutilized. I mean, you know, I've been involved with parks over the past weekend a whole lot, and we see that our parks are just not being taken advantage of by young people. Where when I was growing up, we'd be playing in the baseball diamonds or on the basketball court or doing things there. That engages young people and gives them opportunity to do things other than engage in things they may not. So it might sound like a watchword, but I think it's a great investment to be able to do so. I think the second thing that we have to start doing is normalizing therapy and normalizing mental health services to our community. So that's another one that needs to be done. Why? Because much of the anger that we have in our community is rooted in historical generational trauma that leads to us engaging with people in ways that we necessarily shouldn't. That are not necessarily healthy to our community. So, you know, again, they sound like watchwords, but those are true investments that can be made to ensure that we are increasing safety within our community.
thank you. Charise, same question to you. We are constantly paraded with, catch-term solutions. Do you have 2 specific ideas for how to improve community safety that don't involve gun control or police reform?
Yes. So I'll start off with just some quick data. In the first district, where the state identified 22 communities that have the highest firearm violence in the state, right? 22 communities within our state. Within the district, out of those 22, 10 of them lie within our district. So I'm going to set the stage as we proceed with this conversation. That being said, from a federal standpoint, there's 2 things we can do. We can put more money into hospital intervention. So when there's a situation and people want to go to the hospital, what we know is that a lot of things happen, retaliation, feelings, emotions happen at the hospital right now. And there's organizations that are already doing those programs where they have contracts and agreements with community hospitals where they de-escalate the family, they de-escalate the situation, and those work. Right? You are getting right to the problem before it evolves and blows into something else. 2, street interrupters. When it's said and done, that works. Northwestern did a study on it in 2016 that showed that when Brownridge had a budget impasse, violence, particularly firearm violence, escalated. It spiked because there was no funding for street interrupters. I work at ICEJA. We've seen data where if people from the community have their relationships on both sides, they stop it before it even happens. But they can de-escalate, they can stop the retaliation. If you can fund that and actually give them the funding quicker, because we know government is slow. I work there. But to have basically funding match the rate of the response of crime, then you can have these programs that can actually work. We know that they work. And these are 2 very specific things. These are things that we're starting to fund. It's become a conversation. But there needs to be more investment. And right now, the infrastructure bill that I think Jonathan mentioned, there's only $500 million for that. That's not even enough. That's barely a drop in the bucket. Right now, Biden has a community investment initiative program where they're going to put $5 billion into this initiative. That is something that we can champion, that hasn't passed, and that's real money that can actually do real impact in our communities.
So before we move forward with the next round of questions, there's just one thing that I'd like to uplift, if I may, and that is that this conversation is streaming live right now from the Voices of West Englewood Facebook page. I do believe that all the candidates will send that link prior to this evening's debate, so hopefully they will, after this is over, share it from their pages, but in the event that they do not, you will have access to this discussion from that page. Feel free to send up that link to your family or friends who did not be with us this evening, okay? The second thing I would like to do is introduce our next round of questions. So this is going to be a speed round of questions. In this round, you will not actually be stating expanded answers. You will instead be raising your hands. I will be asking questions to which you may either answer yes or no. I will give you an opportunity to raise your hand for yes. I will also give you an opportunity to raise your hand for no. This round will contain 15 questions. At the conclusion of that, we'll move to a new round. Fair enough? Okay. Question one.
So raising your hand means yes?
I will say, please raise your hand for yes, or please raise your hand for no.
Got it. Thank you.
Is there any for abstentions? You did that last time.
What do you, I can, yeah. No, okay.
Ignore me.
Would you support a bill that adds more justices to the Supreme Court? Please raise your hand for yes. Would you support a bill that adds more justices to the Supreme Court? Please raise your hands for no. Question 2. Should term limits be imposed on Supreme Court justices? Raise your hand for yes. Question 2. Should term limits be imposed on Supreme Court justices? Raise your hand for no. Question 3. Should voting rights be restored federally to convicted felons who have completed their sentences? Raise your hand for yes. Number 3. Should voting rights be restored federally to convicted felons who have completed their sentences? Raise your hand for no. Now, question 4. Should the federal death penalty be abolished? Raise your hand for yes. Question 4. Should the federal death penalty be abolished? Raise your hand for no. Question 5. The U.S. and Illinois have a long history of over-incarcerating and criminalizing Black and brown communities. As a result, 55% of people in IDOC are Black, while Black people only make up roughly 15% of the state's total population, and people in prison cannot vote. Do you believe this has a negative impact on our democracy? Raise your hand for yes. Question 5. The U.S. and Illinois have a long history of over-incarcerating and criminalizing Black and brown communities. As a result, 55% of people in IDOC are Black, while Black people make up only roughly 15% of the state's total population, and people in prison cannot vote. Do you believe this has a negative impact on our democracy? Raise your hand for no. Question 6. Do you support a federal law that would immediately release from prison anyone currently serving time for a marijuana-only charge in states where marijuana is no longer a crime? Raise your hand for yes. Question 6. Do you support a federal law that would immediately release from prison anyone currently serving time for a marijuana-only charge in states where marijuana is no longer a crime? Raise your hand for no. Question 7. Should cannabis be legalized federally? Raise your hand for yes. Question 7. Should cannabis be legalized federally? Raise your hand for no. Question 8. Do you support eliminating the immunity for gun manufacturers? Raise your hand for yes. Question 8. Do you support eliminating the immunity for gun manufacturers? Raise your hand for no. Question 9. Many conservatives fear that any gun safety legislation is a slippery slope to abolishing the Second Amendment. Would you vote yes to abolish the Second Amendment? Raise your hand for yes. Question 9. Many conservatives fear that any gun safety legislation is a slippery slope to abolishing the Second Amendment. Would you vote yes to abolish the Second Amendment? Raise your hand for no. Question 10. Would you support amending the Second Amendment so that its language is more clear and updated for the 21st century? Raise your hand for yes. Question 10. Would you support amending the Second Amendment so that its language is more clear and updated for the 21st century? Raise your hand for no. Question 11. Do you support all the following? Red flag laws, raising the purchasing age to 21 for all guns, banning bump stocks, banning high-capacity magazines. Raise your hand for yes. Question 11. Do you support all of the following? Red flag laws, raising the purchasing age to 21 for all guns, banning bump stocks, Banning high-capacity magazines, raise your hand for no. Question 12. Do you believe more guns on the streets inevitably leads to more violence? Raise your hand for yes. Question 12. Do you believe more guns on the streets inevitably leads to more violence? Raise your hand for no. Question 13. Do you own a firearm? Raise your hand for yes. Question 13. Do you own a firearm? Raise your hand for no. Question 14. Do you support a wealth tax on billionaires? Raise your hand for yes. Question 14. Do you support a wealth tax on billionaires? Raise your hand for no. Question 15. Do you support free public college? Raise your hand for yes. Question 15. Do you support free public college? Raise your hand for no. All right, that concludes our first speed round. Thank you. At this time, we will engage in another round of discussion questions. That will work actually a lot like the very first round of questions you experienced. That will be a conversation between you and the moderators. That conversation will last for 3 minutes. You'll receive a 30-second warning from me. You have 30 seconds left, and of course, I'll let you know when we're at time. Fair enough? Okay, we will begin this round with Grace.
So with this round, we're asking questions about something that we know something about. So this question will go back to the alphabetical order. So this question is for Kirby Birgans first, and then Sandra Collins. The U.S. criminal justice system is touted as a system that believes in second chances, yet non-citizens, even those with legal immigrant status and have lived in the U.S. for a long time, are not afforded the same rights as citizens in our criminal justice system. People in ICE custody often languish in jails because of harsh immigration laws and the lack of due process. How would you address protecting the rights of those in ICE custody federally?
Well, the first thing that I want to do is I want to ban ICE. I want to get rid of ICE. We don't need ICE. I think that that's the first thing we want to do. The second thing we want to do is put forth a plan where we can get our immigrants into becoming citizens of the United States. That's the second thing we want to do. We have seen so many racial acts from ICE, even from when we saw them on horses, whooping descendants of Africans. It was discouraged to see, and I think that it's time that we get rid of them. But I also believe that implementing policies around immigration is the key to helping with this. And so if elected, that's what I want to do, implement policies around a better immigration system.
Jen, I'd like to ask a follow-up. Are there specific policies you would like to implement, you would like to change about the immigration system?
I'm sorry.
Are there specific things that you would like to change about our current immigration system?
Well, first, I would like to make sure that the Dreamers are receiving a pathway to citizenship. That's the first thing I would want to see. It's sad to see someone that was brought here in America, not by their own merits, but by the fact of their families coming here. America is all that they know, and they're being sent back, deported, back into a country that they have no knowledge of. So that would be the first thing. I also believe in what our Statue of Liberty say, bring us your tired, bring us your poor. And I think that that's where the fabric of America is. We're all immigrants to a certain extent. And so I want to make sure that we're implementing those policies that is catered to that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Birgans. Senator Collins, the same question.
I think this is where,
do you need me to read it, or are you just going to answer?
I think I remember it, because I pretty much agreed with my comrade over here in reference to, I think we need to abolish and defund ICE, And we did take measures in the state to ensure that we had a bill that moved forward to ensure that we protected, we abolished the, there was a ICE detention center that we closed in the state, allowing them to be listening to some of my other immigrant colleagues. But we do need to defund ICE, and I believe that we have to restore human dignity and human rights to the issue of immigration. I support the DREAM Act, and I think we do need, for those citizens who are here already, I mean, the individuals that are here should have a clear path to citizenship. And I think also that what we're seeing based on the former administrations, we've seen a rise in xenophobia and racism. And I think we need to be a strong voice and advocate for the rights of all individuals. Dr. King said injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And it's very discriminatory, and yet you see how the doors have been opened for the Ukraine refugees. And I think anyone who suffers from human rights violations need to have access to the United States. But we also saw the horrific incidences of children in cages on the border, and how even our Haitian seekers for asylum were put back on horses into the waters. And so if we're going to have a policy, it has to be equity across the board. And I feel that if we can't open a door to refugees, those who are already here, those who are brought here as children, should have a definite right to pursue their citizenship.
My next questions are going to be for Jonathan Jackson and Karin Norington-Reaves. For the last 90 years, the First Congressional District has been led by a Black person. And for most of that time, this has been called the center of Black political power. But with the new map, it will now be the second in terms of majority Black district to the second. And one of those reasons is because Black folks can't continue to afford to live across the First District. Chicago alone is 120,000 units short of adequate affordable housing, yet we're giving 26 acres of public land to the Chicago Fire. One of our alderwomen fought and was on the CHA waiting list for 30 years, and you have other alder people fighting affordable housing in their wards. What can you do, and what will you do as a federal legislator to increase the amount of affordable housing across your district, not just here in Chicago? Jonathan Jackson.
Thank you. The city of Chicago also houses Cook County Land Bank, which has the most public lands of any county in the country. It breaks my heart to see these vacant lots. How did a city that's over 100 years old, that had factories and housing, now end up with vacant lots, meaning that its values went down to zero? That the lots have no economic value. When we see that this is policy, when you see 261,000 African Americans have moved out of the city of Chicago, out of the state of Illinois, in the first 2 decades of the new millennium. In any other part of the world, they would call that ethnic cleansing because it's so precise and is affecting one demographic specifically. I think what we could do to turn that around under this Biden administration is to go to the Secretary of HUD, Mrs. Marcia Fudge, and make a proposal on how we can have a city, state, and federal partnership to turn these vacant lots back into housing. We need to move on housing with all speed. We've lost a congressional district as a consequence, and we can turn that around. Many people in Chicago have now left to go to Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, Colorado, Raleigh, DC. Why? Because they found safety and opportunity. So it's an issue we have to address on public safety, and we have to address it on opportunity. Opportunity meaning African Americans aren't getting their fair share of contracts to stay employed in the state.
Quick follow-up to that. You mentioned HUD. Well, they were a department that was partly responsible for the public housing destruction we saw throughout the 90s. How do you hold them accountable to do right by the city as well?
Well, what our local officials had pushed for was granted by the federal government, which is a problem. They tore down affordable public housing before they replaced it. They know by law, we need equal protection of the law.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
Okay, question of order. Is there a device you speak, or how does this, is there a 15-second timer?
There was a 30-second follow. I still asked to follow up, so it's my fault that I could have let you in there, but I had a little bit of time. I wanted to push on the
order. Thank you.
Appreciate you. Same question to Karin Norington-Reaves. With 100,000 units short of adequate housing and older people fighting, what can you do at the federal level, and what will you do as a federal legislator to increase the amount of affordable housing across your district?
Jacoby, I just have one question. Are we saying we're short of adequate housing or affordable housing?
We're talking about affordable, adequate, affordable housing.
Thank you. So, to me, that gets to the root of it. The issue is the cost of housing in our markets. I was talking with someone the other day who's working on a development, and they showed me that the price was going to be $300,000. And I said, well, that's not affordable. And they said, oh, in our market it is. That's not affordable to me. I know I couldn't afford one of those homes. And so it's not affordable for the average person. So one of the issues that we have to address is failed housing policy that has gotten us into the shape we're in now. We have folks who are on a waiting list years and years long. The average wait time on the CHA wait list right now is about 11 years. 11 years to get affordable housing. And what are you supposed to do in the meantime? Live under a bridge? It's unacceptable. And so we have to actually create the investments to ensure that we have market rate housing. Right over here in Woodlawn, when I was chief of staff here in the 20th Ward many years ago, we worked with POA, Preservation of Affordable Housing, to create mixed income housing so that there was an opportunity for everybody to live together, as opposed to what we did within CHA in the city of Chicago, which is where we put all poor people, lumped them in together, and then when we decided we were done with those buildings and that property actually had value, we sent people out to the suburbs without resources to actually survive. And so the first thing we have to do is deal with the cost of the housing, and I think we do that by, number one, incentivizing the housing stock that we do have, the owners of that housing stock, to actually create more mixed use, mixed income housing within the city. The other issue is a lot of the developers use new market tax credits in order to do their developments, but there's a limitation on the number of those tax credits that you can actually get, and so we need to actually increase and expand upon those tax credits to, again, help incentivize the creation of more affordable housing. The other piece that I would say is that we have got to get away from all of the failed policies that we saw in place under Ben Carson as the leader of HUD. We now have Marsha Fudge in place. She is a former congressperson. She understands these issues. She has lived experience as an African-American woman. And so we need to actually create the opportunity to create brand new housing policies that eliminate these waiting lists so that people have a safe and affordable place to live.
Thank you. The next question is for Jacqueline Swain and Charise WIlliams. 2021 was a year of record high anti-trans legislation throughout the U.S., and surveys and studies show that housing and employment discrimination disproportionately affect trans and gender-expansive people of color. How would you pledge support, in what ways would you pledge support to the most vulnerable members of the LGBTQ community in securing employment and housing?
Well, obviously that starts with legislation, banning discrimination against any community generally, beyond not just the LGBTQ community, not just the trans community. I think there's also a normalization that has to happen from leadership, where in the African American community in particular, we have to start being, we have to eliminate our anti-trans bias, particularly with Black men. So I think one, it's a leadership question. Secondly, I think it's a legislative question to ensure that in every area of federal government that there is the elimination of bias and discrimination relates to these matters. that they are protected under federal statutes. But then also, I think it goes to embracing the community with respect to folks that want to change their gender on birth certificates, in how they want to be, how folks want to be identified. That we as a community, as a culture, need to embrace how folks want to be identified, how they want to participate and present themselves in the community. And I think it involves also listening. In recent times, remember my family has come out as trans, and so that's created a great opportunity for us as a family to really understand what it means to be trans, what it means to be a part of that community, and really learning. And it's been a great experience for me personally to grow in that space. So I think it's listening as leadership, it's leading, getting rid of the homophobia and transphobia, and then I think also legislatively laying down the framework to prevent any discrimination within the community.
So the follow-up is, are there specific legislation that you would like to pass to address this issue?
One of the things I say about my leadership in this particular position is that coming to this role with all the expanse of the federal government, I'm not an expert in any of it at this particular point in time. So I think what I want to do is to partner with people in the community to understand the legislation that they see that needs to be passed. One of the big issues I keep hearing about is about birth certificates and driver's license and the like. So that's one place I would start. But again, it's about listening to the community, identifying
30 seconds, Mr. Swain.
Identifying the places that need to be done, and then implementing those policies. I don't foresee to have those answers today, but as we grow and we learn and work together, we'll develop policy to do so.
Thank you. Thank you. So the same question the same question for Ms. Williams. Do you need to repeat the question? Sure. I'll read it again. 2021 was a year of record high anti-trans legislation throughout the U.S. And surveys and studies show that housing and employment discrimination disproportionately affect trans and gender expansive people of color. In what ways can you pledge support to the most vulnerable members of the LGBTQ community in securing employment and housing?
So throughout the country, there are 29 states that do not have protections for LGBTQ people. Illinois is one that has full protection for LGBTQ population. There's currently an act, so it's expansion of the Equality Act, so it's called the Support the Equality Act, Equity Act, I'm sorry, where specifically to expand those protections for the LGBTQ population. I would support that legislation. And what that does is that it codifies rights that are already part of the act. So right now, it would allow them, it would erase or protect them from discrimination against credit. And so they're not discriminated when they buy a car. It would protect around housing and employment. Even though the law is there, because it's not codified, depending on new legislation, can take it back at any time. Right? So we're having these conversations just about the importance of codifying even Title VI, right? With voting rights, women's right to choose, all of that is part of the bigger conversation of protecting this population. To make sure that regardless of who's in charge, those rights aren't threatened. So that's legislation that is happening right now. It was been championed as of late last year, so I would support that piece to make sure that our population is protected, again, regardless. It's codifying those people. So housing, employment, credit, even the right to adopt. That is a conversation where people should not come to people's house and tell them who they can and can't parent. So those are the legislation that I will work on.
I think you've answered questions about legislation that you would like to support. Are there legislation that is currently in place that you think should be repealed?
Repealed?
No? Thank you. No?
All right, that concludes our second round of candidate moderator exchanges. Thank you all for participating in that. So before we move forward, I'm sure that as you listen to those questions and answers as audience members, you may have come up with questions of your own you would like to ask our panelists. So if you have not yet done so, this is your opportunity to pull out a pen and write down questions. Moral is coming with cards for everybody in the audience to write down questions you may have for our panelists about reinventing public safety. If you do have questions, I encourage you to write those down at this time because we will be asking those in our third round. Now that I've gotten that taken care of, I'd like to move on to another speed round. So we will do some more yes/no questions, same format as before. I will pose 15 questions. I will ask you to raise your hand for yes, as well as raise your hand for no. Ready? Here we go. Question 1. Do you support legislative curfews for young people? Raise your hand for yes. Question 1. Do you support legislative curfews for young people? Raise your hand for no. Question 2. Under current federal law, it's very difficult to hold police officers accountable for any injury and death that they might inflict while on duty because of qualified immunity. Would you work to change this by reintroducing and working to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act? Raise your hand for yes. Question 2. Under current federal law, it's very difficult to hold police officers accountable for any injury and death they may inflict while on duty because of qualified immunity. Would you work to change this by reintroducing and working to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act? Raise your hand for no. Question 3. Do you believe we reduce violence when we put more police on the streets? Raise your hand for yes. Question 3. Do you believe we reduce violence when we put more police on the streets? Raise your hand for no. Question 4. Police departments nationwide suffer from staggeringly high rates of suicide. Do police officers and police unions need more money for mental health services? Raise your hands for yes. Question 4. Police departments nationwide suffer from staggeringly high rates of suicide. Do police officers and police unions need more money for mental health services? Raise your hand for no. Question 5. Would you support a budget that reduces spending on armed, uniformed officers at all levels while shifting those dollars to mental health resources and other proven methods for reducing violence in the first place? Raise your hand for yes. Question 5. Would you support a budget that reduces spending on armed, uniformed officers at all levels while shifting those dollars to mental health resources and other proven methods for reducing violence in the first place? Raise your hand for no. Question 6. Is there a through line in your opinion from slavery to Jim Crow to modern day policing? Raise your hand for yes. Question 6. Is there a through line in your opinion from slavery to Jim Crow to modern day policing? Raise your hand for no. Question 7. Do you envision communities without police? Raise your hand for yes. Question 7. Do you envision communities without police? Raise your hand for no. Question 8. Do police officers belong in schools? Raise your hand for yes. Question 8. Do police officers belong in schools? Raise your hand for no. Question 9. Congress recently voted on the Women's Health Protection Act, which aimed to protect abortion federally. It did not pass the Senate because all Republicans plus Democrat Joe Manchin voted against it. As a result, when Roe is overturned later this month, millions of American women will lose their constitutional right to bodily autonomy. Will you fight to ensure that equal rights for all women are restored and protected by federally legalizing the right to abortion? Raise your hand for yes. Question 9. Congress recently voted on the Women's Health Protection Act, which aimed to protect abortion federally. It did not pass the Senate because all the Republicans plus Democrat Joe Manchin voted against it. As a result, when Roe is overturned later this month, millions of American women will lose their constitutional right to bodily autonomy. Will you fight to ensure that equal rights for all women are restored and protected by federally legalizing the right to abortion? Raise your hand for no. Question 10. The Violence Against Women Act was reauthorized and signed into law by Joe Biden this past March. But without closing the boyfriend loophole, will you fight to protect women from violent men they aren't married to by restricting those men's access to guns? Raise your hand for yes. Question 10. The Violence Against Women Act was reauthorized and signed into law by Joe Biden this past March. But without closing the boyfriend loophole, will you fight to protect women from violent men they aren't married to by restricting those men's access to guns? Raise your hand for no. Question 11. Economic disempowerment is a slippery slope to violence, and women and girls often bear the brunt of it. The U.S. is one of only 8 nations in the world that don't guarantee paid leave to new parents and other caregivers. The Family and Medical Insurance Leave Act of 2021 would have finally rectified this and in turn provided a level of safety and economic security to millions of women who otherwise become vulnerable when they're forced to perform this work without pay. Will the passage of paid family leave be one of your highest priorities in the next Congress? Raise your hand for yes. Question 11. Economic disempowerment is a slippery slope to violence, and women and girls often bear the brunt of it. The U.S. is one of only 8 nations in the world that don't guarantee paid leave to new parents and other caregivers. The Family and Medical Insurance Leave Act of 2021 would have finally rectified this and in turn provide a level of safety and economic security to millions of women who otherwise would become vulnerable when they're forced to perform this work without pay. Will the passage of family medical leave be one of your highest priorities in the next Congress? Raise your hand for no. Question 12. Do you support Medicare for all? Raise your hand for yes. Question 12. Do you support Medicare for all? Raise your hand for no. Question 13. Should Congress approach gun violence as a healthcare epidemic and dedicate the same level of resources towards gun violence prevention as has been dedicated to combat COVID-19? Raise your hand for yes. Question 13. Should Congress approach gun violence as a healthcare epidemic and dedicate the same level of resources towards gun violence and prevention as has been dedicated to combat COVID-19? Raise your hand for no. Question 14. Would you vote in favor of House Bill 2542, granting people with prior convictions a gender-related name change as defined by the Illinois Human Rights Act? Raise your hand for yes. Question 14. Would you vote in favor of House Bill 2542, granting people with prior convictions a gender-related name change as defined by the Illinois Human Rights Act? Raise your hand for no. Question 15. Do you support legislation that would codify gay marriage and prevent the Supreme Court from being able to overturn millions of gay marriages? Raise your hand for yes. Question 15. Do you support legislation that would codify gay marriage and prevent the Supreme Court from being able to overturn millions of gay marriages? Raise your hand for no. All right, that concludes our second round of yes/no questions. Thank you, candidates. So at this time, we are going to give the candidates about 5 minutes to just relax. We're going to review all the questions submitted by audience members and ask them at this time. Again, everyone gets a 5-minute break. Please feel free to use the restroom, get up, stretch your legs if you need to. It will conclude with round 3. Thank you. May I ask all panelists to return to their seats. We will begin our next round of questioning at this time. So first, we'd like to thank everybody who took the time to submit an audience question. We received a lot of fantastic questions from each of you. In the interest of time, we know y'all want to be out of here at 8:30. Respect that. We're going to get you out of here on time. We have selected questions that we will pose to each candidate. What will happen is each candidate will receive a question. You will have 2 minutes to answer. We will not interrupt. We will not do a back and forth. At the conclusion of the 2 minutes, I will call time.
Will you give a 30-second warning or no? Sure. Okay, thank you.
All right. I will begin with an audience question for Mr. Jonathan Swain. Mr. Swain, you raised your hand that you would not support increased taxation on billionaires. Why?
Thanks for the question, and whoever asked it, thank you for allowing me to clarify the point. Because I think it's a faulty model. We have a wealth tax right now. That wealth tax is called property tax, where we assess taxes on what the perceived wealth is of a particular asset, in this particular case, the real estate that we own in our homes. Look at how we fight over that right now. There's a big fight in the assessor's office about what things are worth. We fight about what our house values are and our taxes are, and we're everyday folks. Imagine what happens when you start doing the same kind of system for billionaires, because a lot of their holdings are not publicly traded. A lot of them are privately held. So when you really think about how you're going to assess, it's a practical question. And when you think about how you're going to assess taxes on billionaires' assets, at their assets, billionaires will, let's say it's December 31st, we have to declare what your assets are worth. Billionaires will begin to market manipulate the value of their assets in such a way that can have a larger impact on everyday people's 401ks. They will manipulate stock prices, they'll manipulate a bunch of other things that could reduce the amount of tax they're going to have to pay. And I think it will have a broader impact on everyday people that we're not taking into account. It sounds great, but when you implement it practically, I think it becomes a lot more difficult. I'd also say that our focus should be on corporate taxation and increasing the corporate tax rates. It should be on making sure money that are going outside the country are brought back to the country, and we should focus on taxing income appropriately. That is the way we get at this problem, not trying to create a mechanism that's actually going to cause more damage in the long term by its implementation than we think.
Thank you.
All right. My first question is for Kirby. Oftentimes, grassroots organizations who are already doing the work to improve public safety are not given credit or financial support or a seat at the table. Is there a grassroots organization that you've worked with that's doing the work to improve public safety, and how would you increase their resources?
I have volunteered with several organizations. That's what I am. I'm a volunteer by heart. So I have volunteered with My Block, My Hood, My City. I have volunteered with Chicago Creed, which is a program by former Secretary Arnie Duncan. I believe that their model on how to tackle gun violence is what I stand for. They go straight with street outreach, they do the coaching and counseling, they do the workforce development, they do the advocacy and prevention. I believe that group, and is showing results. That's the part that we should want to hear, that is showing results. And so with me, I believe that funding those programs, working with those programs, building a cross movement with those programs, and tackling gun violence is the way to go.
Thank you.
45 seconds up if you want to follow up.
Hello, can you pass the mic to Charise WIlliams, please? So my first question is from the audience. So the city of Chicago is giving out subsidies and grants for security cameras and burglar alarms and so on. Do you support the use of technology such as cameras and surveilling social media in order to increase safety?
Support it from a city perspective, right? From just general?
In general.
So in general, I do support surveillance if it's done correctly. So you mentioned this particular program. They're giving out the ring alarms and cameras, but no one can install them. So they're giving it to the seniors, and literally they can't install them. They need help. I know this because I've had to help some of my neighbors install it. So you can't give people equipment and not give them the capacity to actually use it, right? So when you go to a bigger question about that, I think our community's already over surveillance. I literally have driven to like Mario's parking lot and seen the blue light and don't understand why there's a blue light at Mario's parking lot on 39th and King Drive, but not one on Monroe and Halsted. So there's an over surveillance that's happening in our community right now. I don't support that. I think that there's a way to find a balance. I know that some people, it's from a personal home, they want it, right? It makes them feel better when people are going in their home. If they want that, you give them the option, but also giving them the resources to implement it. From a bigger standpoint, from a community and just even in federal legislation.
30 seconds, Ms. Williams.
From a federal legislation, I don't support over surveillance. But even though that being said, from the social media standpoint too, I think there is a way to do it. I know that a lot of happenings and mob risings start on social media. Even just recently, as on 31st Street Beach, there was a takeover 31st Street Beach. That was part of it. You know what? It went well. Nothing happened, right? So even these things you assume just because our youth are getting together, that's something that isn't happening.
We're at time.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question is for Senator Collins. When the federal government gives money to a state to distribute, it needs agencies and not-for-profits to do the actual work of reaching the individuals who need it. These agencies and not-for-profits have to go through an application process called procurement in order for the money to be awarded. This process is currently so arduous and complex. The only ones who ever get any money are the Old Boys Network of traditional, well-resourced groups. The supposed purpose of this is to ensure accountability, and of course we need to retain that aspect. What will you do to fix this process so that a small violence prevention organization doing great work has a shot at receiving funding without having to first hire an expensive grant writer?
So I'm glad you asked that question because the Illinois Black Caucus put in place technical assistance for the smaller organizations that don't have the capacity or the expertise. Many of the organizations in Auburn, Gresham, and West Englewood that I represent were not able, maybe missed out on the opportunities. We saw that as an impediment because we really wanted the people that are on the ground getting the access to the money. Previously, what happened was you had the large omnibus organizations like maybe the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, Catholic Charities, or the Safer Foundation, even though they could do good work. We knew that there were other organizations, smaller organizations, that are really having the day-to-day interaction with the people that were hurting in pain and the youth. That's why we set up with ICEJA a program in which we wanted to ensure that they had not only the money from the cannabis, but also giving them the technical assistance and helping them fill out the applications. Many of the organizations in my district were able to get funding once I allowed them to go to a webinar or get the hand-on experience of filling out the application. So this is something we've moved on. It's not perfect yet, but we've been successful. Many of the smaller organizations now that our Charise used to oversee have received the money, and I fought against the large organizations, and Charise will tell you, I came to the table and fought the director of ICEJA to ensure that not these large organizations got the money, but the organizations that are really on the ground in my community.
Okay, thank you.
This question is to Jonathan Jackson. You said you would abolish the Second Amendment, and you were the only one to raise your hand to say that you own a firearm. Make it make sense. Why do you own a firearm if you don't think they should be legal?
Thank you. Because of personal concerns, and I do abide by the law. So I do have a gun, I do not carry for my homeowner. I was broken into 3 out of 4 years in a row. So I had heightened safety concerns in my house, number one. Number two, I think the language of the Second Amendment is antiquated. It has exceeded its original life and expectancy. It should be removed. It was for an armed militia. In specific, it was to enhance those that were trying to keep persons in slavery. So it's a long history behind the Second Amendment. Now our nation has evolved. We have a military, we have state officials, we have local police. It's not necessary that our citizens are so heavily armed. What we saw most recently in Texas is that a child, I would call him 17 plus a day, 18 years of age, was able to buy a high caliber assault weapon that the police officer cannot even carry. That is unnecessary, and I think that's why we should reduce the armament. We now have 400 million guns in America, more guns than we have citizens, so we're going in the wrong direction.
Thank you. The next question is for Karin Norington-Reaves. Pass the mic down, please. We have seen the funding from the Small Business Administration, SBA, not reach Black businesses quickly. How would you help by putting policies in place that will help get these small Black businesses funding that they need?
So first we have to reduce the barriers for access to capital and barriers for access to that very funding that you're speaking of. We have small business development centers all throughout the city, the state, the country. They are handicapped. They are not able to access the type of funding that they need in order to actually create the programs that will penetrate and provide support to communities. I can also tell you from my experience as the founder and CEO of the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership, there are a lot of pilot projects that we would get out of DC. One of the pilot projects was around entrepreneurship and helping people start businesses. Well, they gave them $1,000 and they would not allow us to use workforce development training dollars to actually train people with respect to entrepreneurship. Folks were successful in completing the program, but then there was no funding, no capital, no seed money available to them to actually launch their programs, launch their different companies. And so we really have to reimagine the structure that we have. The SBDCs really want to do right by people, but there's not integration with all of the other funding mechanisms. For example, the $17 billion in training funds that reside within the U.S. Department of Labor. There's not integration so that we can actually enable people to stand up their companies. The other piece is bias. We have banks that just aren't willing to lend. Thank you. We have banks that aren't willing to lend in great capacity to Black and brown businesses. And so we have to actually change the system and turn it on its head in order to ensure that we're giving access to capital and the capacity to actually start new businesses within our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this point, we have one question that we are going to pose to every candidate. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer the question, and it will be an answer that is uninterrupted by me or any of the moderators. Are we ready?
I'll give you 15-second warning on this one. Do you have a particular order?
I will go from right to left. Mr. Swain, what role do you believe the community should play in police accountability, if any?
The community is paramount. The community should be centered in police accountability. At the end of the day, the community is the one that's interacting with police on a daily basis, and their voice should be centered in everything that's done around police reform, community policing, and the like. And so the job of the legislator is to listen, not to dictate, but to listen as to what the community needs, and then translate that into policy. And so for me, the guide on anything with respect to policing is really the community voice. That's why organizations like this, organizing within the community, really getting the voice out of the totality of people within the community as it relates to police is important and paramount to ensure that all voices are being heard at the table and those are translated.
15. Oh,
Yeah.
excellent.
Jonathan Swain, Punch 48, by June 28.
Ms. Norington-Reaves, what role do you believe the community should play in police accountability, if any?
So the motto of the police is to protect and serve. Protect and serve who? The community. And so the community has, I think, ultimate responsibility when it comes to police accountability. We need police accountability boards that are from the community and of the community and that are holding the police accountable for the way in which they interact with us. We all want to be able to call the police if we are the victim of a crime. What we need is to survive that interaction. We need to be treated with respect and humility during that interaction, and we need to be treated in a way that is unbiased. And so we really need police boards that are centered with the community members, and for those community members to actually have power, authority, control, and the ability to impact the way in which we hold our officers accountable for their conduct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Williams, what role do you believe the community should play in police accountability, if any?
So the community should be centered in all conversations. I agree, as with Karin, is that the people need to be actually from the community. What we know is that we have all these community boards, but they're picked by, an elected official, right? So they don't really have a voice. It usually ends up being a friend or an associate. There needs to actually be a real dialogue with all levels of government, including Congress, including your congressman. Even from police, there also needs to be a bigger conversation just about criminal justice reform. That has to be part of the conversation. That conversation cannot happen without a community involvement at all levels. There needs to be transparency from the top to the bottom regarding which legislations are coming down, which ones don't work,
15 seconds,
which ones do work, and all that conversation should be centered around community input. And also have the power to implement it, and have the power to hold it accountable, and have the power to take it away when it doesn't work. So in all, punch 47, sorry, Charise WIlliams, June 28.
Senator Collins, what role do you believe the community should play in police accountability, if any?
I would start saying that we have so much distress in the community in reference to police force and the use of police force. So I think, first of all, to make the community involved, engage more, we need to protect the community when they come forward to offer advice. So right now, there's a requirement, we're going to remove the requirement for a sworn affidavit. We want the community forces to come forward to report on a bad police or anything that's being done that they don't accept from the police, right? So we need to ensure them that they will be protected and there's no intimidation. But I think not only do the police have to be held accountable, but elected officials, myself, have to be held accountable.
15 seconds, Senator.
The information that we move so far in criminal justice reform has come from the ground level. It's come from the community. Those people have personally experienced abuse. So that's how I have an open door policy to work with the community to ensure that they move forward in being reformed in criminal justice.
Thank you.
As James Baldwin said,
I was going to ask you the question again, Mr. Bergman, second.
as James Baldwin said, when one wants to know how justice is administrated in America, you do not ask the middle class, the police, you go to those that need the protecting the most. And so I believe that community is very vital to when it comes down to policing. And that's the reason why I support the George Floyd Justice and Police Act, because it helps bridge that connection between policing and communities. And in those knock warrants and in the chokeholds, it put together a database to hold police accountable. These are the things that the community is looking for. It also, we need someone that is going to be in office to help, as Jacqueline Collins said, elected officials, holding them accountable. So we can also make sure that we're putting together new policies that will help with this as well.
Mr. Jackson, what role do you believe the community should play in police accountability, if any?
First of all, I believe in the city of Chicago, we should have an elected police board. That it is unbelievable that after the police commits a crime, you got to call to the police department for internal affairs, office of professional standards, where they get to investigate themselves, where then you tell your side of it, and they get to give the officer 48 hours to make his story. And then after the superintendent of police wants to have an officer fired, that the police board that's appointed can overturn it, where now they don't even have the accountability internally. So we have to have an elected police board where police can be fired. They cannot have this immunity where they can kill someone live and have impunity. We've seen this too often with Derek Chauvin, with Severin here in Illinois, with Commander John Burge. So the police need...
15 seconds, Mr. Jackson.
So our citizens need to be on the board, and I would like to see the officers respected and the citizens protected.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I will ask two final yes or no questions. Once we conclude that, each candidate will have 2 minutes to give a closing statement, okay? Alrighty, first yes or no question. Do you support community control over the police? Raise your hand for yes.
Community what?
Sure, I will say it more slowly. Do you support community control over the police? Raise your hand for yes. Do you support community control over the police? Raise your hand for no. Final question. Would you support limiting the use of solitary confinement in Illinois prisons as with the Isolated Confinement Restriction Act, House Bill 3564? Raise your hand for yes. Would you support limiting the use of solitary confinement in Illinois prisons as with the Isolated Confinement Restriction Act, House Bill 3564? Raise your hand for no. Thank you. At this time, each candidate will have 2 minutes to give a closing statement. This time we will go from left to right. Mr. Jackson, we'll begin with you.
My name is Jonathan Jackson, running for Congress in the 1st Congressional District. I would appreciate your vote, your support. I would like to represent you in Congress because the 1st Congressional District's in pain. I'd like to acknowledge a very special gentleman here, Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris, whom I've just met today, is part of the passion that I have for running. A man that had a nonviolent offense that ended up doing 35 years in jail right here in the state of Illinois. I stood up to confront the legacy of torturing Commander John Burge. I stood up to fight against the school closures right here. You're gonna need someone that is compassionate and courageous. There's gonna be a fight under the rotunda. I am well capable, qualified, compassionate, and I want to get the job done for you. I'm Jonathan Jackson, punch 34. Think Walter Payton and sweetness.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Birgans, 2 minutes.
Hello, I want to first thank Neighbors Who Vote and all of their sponsors for putting on this forum. I want to thank the pastor again for giving us this venue to host this event, and for all of you guys for participating in this form of democracy. As someone who was born, raised, and educated in this district, I understand the disparities here. As a science teacher, I get to see the reality of our community often. I get to put lunches in our students' backpacks, and one of the things that I'm afraid of right now is going back to school next year and hearing that one of my students was shot. So that's the reason why I joined this race, because we need someone that is unbossed and unbought. We have politicians that don't care a heck about us because the money is first for them. With me, I'm the only candidate, I believe, one of the only candidates that's not taking money from corporations and corporate executives. That's the reason why we hosted a forum about gun violence and police accountability, and we got candidates bringing security with weapons that look like AR-15. You shouldn't be in no line of Congress if you're afraid to patrol the neighborhoods that you wish to serve. I promise you, what you get with me is transparency. You're gonna get the real, and you're gonna get someone that is literally thriving to make a difference in this community.
Thank you. 2 minutes, Senator Collins.
Thank you. I'm State Senator Jacqueline Collins, and I am running for Congress in the 1st Congressional District. My campaign is named Jackie for Justice because it's rooted in economic, social, and racial justice. No one in this race has a better track record of taking on the tough fights and winning for the 1st Congressional District. I was the chief co-sponsor of raising the minimum wage. I stopped all predatory lending in the state of Illinois. I led on nursing home reform, and I was the first state legislator in the Midwest to ban ghost guns. So I'm not running on rhetoric. I'm running on a legislative record of accomplishment. And the 1st Congressional District deserves a candidate who has delivered again and again. So I'm running to give justice a seat at the policy table. And I'm running, not taking money from corporations. I joined with my comrade here. I'm not taking money from corporations because I am unbought and unbossed. And dark money is entering into this campaign. You don't want dark money or independent expenditures coming into this race because who will you be beholden to? I'm running on people power. And I have an A1, A+ rating with Planned Parenthood. I have the Profiles of Courage Award for taking on gun violence received from the Gun Violence Prevention PAC. And I also have the support of social justice champions. Father Michael Flaker, Jackie Grimshaw, Dr. Cornell West. So I'm running Punch. It's time, Punch 39. You can go to my website, JackieForJustice.com, to read about my other legislative accomplishments. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Williams, 2 minutes.
Thank you. So thank you for having this forum. Thank you for the pastor for inviting us to this church. I'm going to switch it up just a little bit and not do a political pitch. I'm just going to talk to you all like family. I'm Charise WIlliams. I am running for Congress, but I'm honestly running because I'm a single mom. I have a black son who is 21. He's at Morehouse, and when he leaves the house, it scares me. When I walk outside, I see the same thing now that I saw before. It hasn't changed a lot in 20 years, and I'm tired of it looking the same. I'm tired of it today. Our district looks the same now as it did 20 years ago, and up north it's thriving. It's thriving. I shouldn't have to go up north just to get some new flowers. And I want to run. I'm running for us. I look at you all here sitting in this hot church, no offense, Pastor, in this hot church, and we're here because we want something different and we want change. And regardless of who you all pick, it's 17 of us. I think it's a great thing that we have so many options, but I'm asking you all to be educated. When you leave here, research everyone here. Don't vote for somebody because they're named, or somebody who's been in the General Assembly for 30 years, and that's the name you know. Vote for who you think will go to DC and will be unapologetic about bringing resources back to the community, who understands the struggles that you have and I have every single day. We need someone in DC who will go there and understands what it feels like when you don't have Medicare and you need Medicare to buy for prescription drugs. When you need those services, when you need SNAP because you went to school and you had to start over. I'm asking you just to do research. I know I'm the best candidate, but I want you to leave here and make an educated decision. So punch 47, but also punch 47 because you believe I'm going to be the right person for the job. Thank you.
Economic opportunity, economic empowerment, economic advancement, and violence. Those are the things that I hear when I'm talking to people in the district. They talk about the need for economic opportunity, and they talk about the need for solutions to crime and violence, and I submit to you that the first helps to provide a cure for the second. My name is Karin Norington-Reaves. I am a 20-year resident of the 1st Congressional District. I'm a 30-year public servant, and for the past 11 and a half years, I've been leading workforce development and economic opportunity and growth for the city of Chicago and Cook County. As the founder and CEO of the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership, under my leadership, more than 100,000 people have gained employment. 100,000 people. For every one person employed, at least 5 individuals are impacted. That means the neighbors. That means the people in that home. Our district is in desperate need of economic development and economic growth, and I'm the only person in this race with a profound record of bringing that to bear.
That is why I'm endorsed by Congressman Rush. It's why I received the endorsement of the Chicago Tribune, as well as numerous labor unions, as well as 12 members of Congress, all the way up to the Assistant Speaker of the House. I am in this race because I care about my community. And rather than leave it, I decided to invest in it. I created a $3.5 million education and workforce development center so that we could have the change that we needed. Rather than leave, like so many other people have done, I decided to stay here and actually put my money where my mouth is. And so I'm running because I know that I am best prepared to help meet the pressing economic needs of our immediate and long-term future. I ask for your support on June 28th. Again, my name is Karin Norington-Reaves, Punch 36. Thank you.
Mr. Swain, 2 minutes.
Thank you to the pastor of the church and all of you for gathering here. It's so important for you to be a part of this important conversation. You know, I'm not going to talk about all the stuff that I've done. You want to know about who I am? Go to my website, Swain4us.com. Okay? But I want to talk about what we can do together. Because here's the thing. Just read an article, and we all know this. You know it's projected to only have 15% turnout for this election? That means if there's 10 people in the room, 1.5 are going to actually show up. So actually, there's 8.5 that actually have something to say, but they don't show up. Why? Because they don't feel seen, they don't feel heard, and they don't believe that they matter. By selecting me as your congressperson, you'll have a leader that leads through listening, that listens to what you all have to say, that's flexible and malleable, that will adjust the perspectives and opinions based on the community concern, but will also begin to listen to those who feel disaffected, who are outside the system, that are outside of these walls, because they matter too. The fact is, as Charise mentioned, our community is not going in the right direction. And the fact is, it's not about even going up north. You can go places in the district, go to Frankfurt. You can live, work, and shop in the same mile in Frankfurt. You can do it in Beverly, on 103rd Street. You just can't do it in all parts of the district. And we can do it together. That's what we can do together. By centering our voices, including you in the solutions, because as you're included in the solutions, we will all gather and try and to get involved in the process. My name is Jonathan Swain, candidate for Congress, Punch 48 by June 28. And even if I'm not your candidate, go find someone and tell them to come to the ballot, because 15% is not what we deserve. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Well, that concludes the forum. At this point, and I'm going to come back around so everybody can see me, I just want to wrap up by firstly thanking each of these candidates who made the time to be with us this evening. I know this is crunch time, this is go time, it's campaign season. You made time for this, you made time for the community, and for that we thank you. So thank you again for your time. Jonathan Swain, Karin Norington-Reaves, Charise WIlliams, Senator Jacqueline Collins, Kirby Birgans, and Mr. Jonathan Jackson. We thank them again for their time. At this point, I'd just like to acknowledge all of the sponsors and co-sponsors who are part of this event. That is Neighbors Who Vote, Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community, the National Association of Black Journalists Chicago Chapter, Teamwork Englewood, the Indo-American Democratic Organization, Indivisible Change, the Daily Line, the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition, City Cash Chicago Podcast, Englewood Political Task Force, and Voices of West Englewood. All of our co-sponsors, thank you for taking the time to be here. And just as a point of personal privilege, yesterday was my birthday, and you all have been my present. You have been wonderful as an audience, very engaged, very patient, and fantastic questions. So I thank you, and have a good evening. Thank you so much.
Volunteers, organizers, come on up here please for a picture. Samantha, paging Samantha, get up here for a picture. Betsy, did you mind taking some photographs? Samantha, Morrow, get up here for a photograph. Come on.
I'm blessed, man.
Come on, y'all. You in it. You in it.
Yeah, hey. You still got me in it.
And candidates, please come for a photograph.
I got here a little late. Yeah, I got here a little late. I made it. Let me just say something. I ran for state rep and I ran.
Excuse me, can I have your autograph?
You've been doing every. Hey, how you doing? Grace Chan McKeeben, how you doing?
Busy being my busy body.
I see. That's a good thing. So you gonna go for all?
Any other organizers? Erica! Charise, get up on that side.